Have you ever judged someone by their clothes, only to discover they were the reason you had everything? Stay with me, because today's story will remind you that gratitude can disappear in a moment, but the truth always finds its way back. Welcome back to Fireside Files, where every story carries a lesson that stays with you long after it's over. On a cool autumn evening, the luxurious Brooks mansion sparkled under thousands of golden lights. Expensive cars lined the driveway, famous business leaders laughed over glasses of champagne, and cameras flashed as billionaire Ethan Brooks celebrated becoming the youngest CEO to lead a billion-dollar technology company. Reporters called him a genius. Investors called him unstoppable. To everyone watching, Ethan looked like a man who had built his empire completely on his own. As musicians played soft classical music and guests admired the mansion's beauty, the enormous front gate slowly opened. An old pickup truck rolled inside, coughing black smoke before coming to a stop. The driver stepped out carefully. He was an elderly mechanic wearing faded blue overalls stained with years of grease. His boots were cracked, his hands rough from decades of hard work, and he carried nothing but an old metal toolbox that had seen better days. The wealthy guests stared at him with confused expressions, whispering among themselves. Someone laughed quietly. Another guest assumed he had arrived to repair a broken generator. But the old man wasn't looking for work. His tired eyes searched the crowd until they stopped on Ethan Brooks. With slow, respectful steps, he walked toward the mansion entrance. Before he could say a single word, two security guards blocked his path. "Sir, this is a private event," one of them said firmly. The old mechanic smiled politely and replied, "I only need 5 minutes. Please tell Mr. Ethan Brooks that Samuel Carter is here. He'll remember me." One guard disappeared inside while the other watched the old man suspiciously. A minute later, Ethan himself appeared at the entrance, wearing a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. His confident smile vanished the moment he saw the mechanic standing outside. Instead of surprise, his face filled with irritation. "What are you doing here?" Ethan asked coldly. Samuel smiled gently. "I only wanted to congratulate you, son. I heard about your success and thought." Ethan cut him off before he could finish. "Don't call me son," he snapped loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. The conversations around them stopped. Every eye turned toward the uncomfortable scene unfolding at the mansion entrance. Samuel lowered his head but remained calm. "I only wanted to give you something," he said quietly as he reached into his toolbox. Ethan immediately stepped back, embarrassed that his wealthy guests were witnessing the encounter. "Security," he ordered sharply, "escort this man off my property. Right now." The guards hesitated, sensing there was more to the story, but they obeyed. One of them gently took Samuel by the arm. The old mechanic didn't argue. He simply nodded, picked up his heavy toolbox, and began walking back toward the gate with slow, tired steps. Some guests smirked. Others looked away, pretending nothing had happened. Ethan straightened his jacket, forced another smile, and turned back toward the party as though nothing important had occurred. But just a few steps away, something unexpected happened. Samuel stumbled slightly on the marble pathway. His old toolbox slipped from his hands and crashed onto the ground. Rusty tools scattered across the white stone floor. Among the scattered wrenches and screwdrivers, a small, worn photograph slid out and landed directly in front of Ethan's polished shoes. Ethan glanced down, almost annoyed. Then he picked it up. The color drained from his face. Because the smiling little boy standing beside the young mechanic in that faded photograph was unmistakably him. But the truth hidden behind that photograph was something no amount of money could ever erase. To be continued. If this story has already touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Fireside Files, because the biggest secrets are still waiting to be revealed. The guests watched Ethan's expression change in an instant. His confident smile disappeared, replaced by confusion and disbelief. His hands began to tremble as he stared at the faded photograph. It showed a little boy no older than 8, smiling brightly while sitting on the hood of an old pickup truck. Standing beside him was a much younger Samuel Carter, covered in engine grease, but wearing the proudest smile imaginable. Ethan's heartbeat grew louder with every passing second. He remembered that truck. He remembered that smile. And suddenly, memories he had buried for years came rushing back. "Where did you get this?" Ethan whispered. Samuel looked at him with gentle eyes and replied softly, "Because I was there the day it was taken." The words struck Ethan like lightning. For the first time that evening, he noticed the scars on Samuel's hands, the wrinkles on his tired face, and the pain hidden behind his quiet smile. Around them, the party had fallen completely silent. Even the musicians had stopped playing. The billionaire who had moments ago stood proudly before the richest people in the city now looked like a frightened child searching for answers he never expected to find. Ethan dismissed the security guards with a wave of his hand. "Leave us alone," he said quietly. The guards stepped back without asking questions. Samuel slowly bent down and gathered his scattered tools one by one. Ethan knelt beside him, helping collect the old wrenches and screwdrivers that moments earlier he had ignored. It was the first time in years that Ethan had touched anything that wasn't polished or expensive. As he placed a rusty wrench back into the toolbox, Samuel smiled faintly. "You still remember how to hold a mechanic's tool," he said. Ethan looked away, unable to answer. The truth was that he hadn't held one since he was a teenager. Samuel closed the toolbox and sat on the mansion's front steps. "You probably don't remember much," he said. "Success has a way of covering old memories." Ethan sat beside him, his expensive tuxedo brushing against Samuel's dusty overalls. For the first time in the evening, wealth meant nothing. Samuel took a deep breath before continuing. "When you were 8 years old, your father walked away. He left your mother with nothing except unpaid bills and a broken house. She worked day and night just to keep food on the table, but after she became seriously ill, there was no one left to help." Ethan closed his eyes. He remembered those nights. He remembered the empty refrigerator and the cold winters when the electricity was cut off. But there was one thing he had never fully understood. Samuel looked toward the stars before speaking again. "I wasn't your father by blood, Ethan. I was simply the mechanic who owned the garage across the street. Every morning, I saw you sitting alone outside your house while your mother struggled to survive. One day, I couldn't ignore it anymore." Ethan felt tears forming in his eyes. Samuel continued, "I started fixing extra cars at night just to buy groceries for your family. I repaired neighbors' vehicles for free so they would give me old clothes that would fit you. When your school asked for tuition, I sold my own pickup truck's spare engine to pay the fees. I never wanted you to know because your mother begged me not to tell you. She wanted you to believe she had done it all herself." Ethan's breathing became heavier. His entire childhood suddenly looked different. Every meal he thought had appeared by chance. Every school book he believed his mother had somehow afforded. Every birthday gift that had mysteriously arrived. None of it had been a miracle. It had been Samuel. The old mechanic quietly wiped away a tear before smiling once more. "I never expected anything in return," he said. "Watching you succeed was enough for me." Ethan lowered his head in shame. The man he had just humiliated in front of hundreds of guests had secretly sacrificed years of his own life so a poor little boy could have a future. Just then, Ethan looked inside the toolbox again. Beneath the old tools lay a sealed envelope with his name written across it in faded handwriting. What was inside that envelope would reveal one final secret, a secret Samuel had hidden for over 20 years, and it would change Ethan's life forever. Stay with us on Fireside Files, because the most heartbreaking truth is still waiting to be uncovered. Door Red Heart. Ethan slowly picked up the sealed envelope. His name, written in faded blue ink, looked as though it had been written decades ago. His hands shook as he carefully opened it. Inside was a stack of old documents, several hospital receipts, and a handwritten letter. Before Ethan could read a single word, Samuel gently placed a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to read it if you're not ready, Samuel said quietly, but Ethan had spent too many years believing a lie. He unfolded the letter and recognized the handwriting immediately. It belonged to his mother. My dearest Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I am no longer here to tell you the truth myself. There is something you must know. The man standing beside you today is not your father, but he gave up more for you than most fathers ever would. Ethan's vision blurred with tears. The letter continued. When I became sick, the doctors said I needed surgery immediately. I had no insurance, no savings, and no family willing to help. I accepted that my life might end. But Samuel disappeared for 3 days. When he returned, he handed the hospital every dollar they asked for. I later discovered he had sold the small garage he had spent his entire life building. The garage that was his dream. He gave it up so I could live long enough to watch you grow. Ethan covered his mouth, unable to breathe. He turned toward Samuel. You sold your garage. Samuel smiled softly. It was only a building, Ethan. No, Ethan whispered. That garage was everything to you. Samuel nodded. You were everything to your mother. Silence filled the mansion. The guests who had laughed only minutes earlier now stood frozen, many wiping tears from their eyes. Ethan continued reading. After your mother recovered, Samuel never allowed us to repay him. He worked wherever he could, repairing cars in parking lots, fixing engines on the roadside, sometimes sleeping inside old vehicles just to save money. Every birthday gift you ever received after that came from him. Every school uniform, every notebook, every opportunity. Samuel quietly made it possible. Ethan collapsed onto the marble steps, every award hanging inside his mansion, every luxury car parked outside, every $1 million in his bank account, had been built on sacrifices he had never known existed. He looked at Samuel with tears streaming down his face. Why didn't you ever tell me? Samuel looked toward the evening sky before answering. Because kindness loses its meaning the moment it asks for recognition. Those words pierced Ethan's heart deeper than anything he had ever heard. Without caring that hundreds of powerful guests were watching, Ethan dropped to his knees. I'm so sorry, he cried. I humiliated the man who gave me my future. Samuel immediately reached down and helped him stand. No, son, he said gently. You simply forgot where you came from. Ethan wrapped his arms around the old mechanic and hugged him tighter than he had hugged anyone in years. Around them, the guests began to applaud. Some openly cried. Even the security guards lowered their heads in shame. But Samuel wasn't finished. He reached into the toolbox one last time and removed a small, rusty key attached to an old wooden tag. He placed it in Ethan's hand. This, Samuel whispered, is the last thing I have left. Ethan looked at the key in confusion. What does it open? Samuel smiled sadly. The answer to the promise I made your mother 25 years ago. And when Ethan unlocked what that key belonged to, he discovered a final surprise that changed not only his own life, but the lives of thousands of others forever. Stay with Fireside Files, because the ending of this story is one you'll never forget. Red Heart. Ethan stared at the small, rusty key resting in his trembling hand. It looked ordinary, but after everything he had learned that evening, he knew it carried a story far greater than its size. Samuel smiled gently and said, "Come with me." Without another word, the two men climbed into Samuel's old pickup truck. For the first time in years, Ethan left behind his luxury cars and rode beside the man he had once been ashamed to acknowledge. Nearly an hour later, they arrived at an abandoned building on the edge of town. The faded sign above the entrance read, "Carter Auto Garage." The windows were covered in dust, the walls were cracked, and weeds had grown through the parking lot. Ethan looked around in disbelief. I thought you sold the garage, he whispered. Samuel nodded. I did. But years later, after saving every dollar I could, I bought it back. Not for myself, for you. Ethan's eyes filled with tears again. Samuel pointed toward the old wooden door. Go ahead. With shaking hands, Ethan inserted the rusty key into the lock. The door opened slowly with a loud creak. Inside, the garage was spotless. Every tool had been carefully arranged. Every machine had been maintained. On the far wall hung hundreds of photographs. Ethan slowly walked closer. The first picture showed him as a little boy learning to hold a wrench. The next showed his first day of school, then his high school graduation, his university ceremony, his first office, his first business award, his first company. Every important moment of his life had been captured, even the ones Ethan himself had forgotten. He turned towards Samuel, speechless. "You were there," Samuel smiled. "I never stopped watching over you." Tears rolled freely down Ethan's face. "For 25 years, Samuel nodded. "I promised your mother that no matter how successful you became, you would never truly be alone." At that moment, Ethan completely broke down. He hugged Samuel with all his strength. "I spent my whole life trying to become a billionaire," he cried. "But tonight I realized I was already rich." Samuel gently smiled. "Money builds houses, Ethan. But love builds homes." The next morning, newspapers across the country carried an unexpected headline: "Billionaire CEO transfers half of his fortune to build free trade schools for underprivileged children." Reporters wanted to know why. During a live press conference, Ethan stood before hundreds of cameras and held up the old photograph. "This man," he said, pointing to Samuel, "never became rich. He never became famous. But every success I've ever achieved belongs to him as much as it belongs to me." The room erupted into applause. Then Ethan made one final announcement. The new foundation would not carry his own name. Instead, it would be called the Samuel Carter Foundation. Its mission was simple: no hardworking child would ever lose their dreams because they were poor. Months later, thousands of young people had learned mechanics, engineering, and technical skills through the foundation. Many found jobs, started businesses, and changed the lives of their families. One quiet afternoon, Ethan and Samuel stood outside the restored garage, watching young apprentices laugh as they repaired their first engines. Samuel looked at Ethan and smiled. "You've done more than I ever dreamed." Ethan smiled back. "No. You taught me that true wealth isn't measured by what's in your bank account. It's measured by the lives you change." As the sun slowly disappeared behind the horizon, Ethan looked at the old photograph one final time before carefully placing it inside the garage office, where everyone could see it. It would forever remind him that the greatest heroes don't wear expensive suits. Sometimes, they wear old overalls stained with grease, and they quietly change the world without asking for anything in return. Thank you for spending your time with Fireside Files. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to Fireside Files for more unforgettable stories that remind us what truly matters. Until next time, take care and never forget the people who helped you become who you are. Red Heart.